Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss some statements from the Managing Director David Byrne of DFDS Seaways, which is a huge ferry company that manages a lot of freight passing between Britain and the continent. And it lays bare much of what I'd talked about last year, but also paints a picture of no quick fixes at all to the customs problems that we're experiencing and which are going to get worse as the year goes on. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So one thing that was clear to me last year was that we couldn't possibly have the customs officials needed to process checks in anything like a timely manner at the end of the transition period. The logic seems simple enough. Michael Gove was saying, nearly a year ago now, that we were going to need 50,000 new customs officials above and beyond what we already have in order to deal with the huge volume of bureaucracy that Brexit was going to cause for our trade. Okay, so I thought, okay, that means you need to recruit 50,000 new customs officials, and then you also need to train 50,000 new customs officials. Now, I don't know how many of the 50,000 have even been recruited to date, but I'm guessing nowhere near the number needed, or the government wouldn't be making it so difficult to find out what the number was. Although I suppose the Conservatives' usual management of the economy will at least make a huge queue of people desperate for a job. So I suppose it shouldn't be too hard to recruit the necessary number in the fullness of time, but I do not know what that fullness of time realistically is. But with the training, I considered three obvious obstacles. So the first one, these new bureaucrats would need to be trained in systems that didn't exist last year. You know, for most of last year didn't exist at all. Some of them still don't, technically. I mean, how do you train officials in the use of a system that hasn't been built yet? So I didn't really think it was likely that new customs officials, 50,000 of them, were going to be trained and ready for the start of this year on that basis alone. Then there was the issue of time. So surely it takes time to become proficient enough to carry out a job like this efficiently. We've already seen how complicated the customs procedures are. Some businesses having to fill in dozens of different forms. So at the other end, in terms of people checking this, to be proficient enough to be familiar with all that, surely that's going to take years of experience. I mean, yeah, you can be trained in, I don't know how long, 6 months maybe, in terms of the basics, but to really get a feel for it, it's going to take years. So without those new customs officials, even if we'd recruited and trained them, being experienced enough, the checks were still going to proceed quite slowly and errors inevitably would occur. Normally, when you have new staff in any context, the more experience will take them under their wing. Their more experienced colleagues will show them the rope, help develop them after their initial training. But with such a massive number of new officials needed, even if they'd been recruited, which, as I say, they clearly have not, they would be outnumbering their more experienced colleagues. So there's no way of doing this. And then the third obstacle that I saw was in the training itself. Who exactly was going to train them? You have to be trained by someone who's experienced and knowledgeable in that work. Well, those are the people actually doing the work. So if you get them to train tens of thousands of new customs officials, they're not actually doing the job of being a customs official themselves. Ordinarily, you can understand it. I mean, if every year you get an influx of, say, 5%, something like that, staff, you can manage that training. But if it's going to be hundreds of percent, and it's the third one that Mr. Byrne identified, as a key problem. So he pointed out that his company was having to turn ships away because there was no room at the port for the freight they were carrying. Like we can think about lorries being put into a lorry park, for example, to avoid tailbacks at a port. Stick them at a lorry park. What do you do with a ship? You can't. If there's no room at the port for their cargo, you're just like, sorry, there's no room. Go away. You can't just mill around. And he also said that transport was 20% down last month as compared to previous Januaries, and yet the ports were at a complete standstill. So 20% less shippage, still at a complete standstill. And I have to say, so I spent so long at looking at what was happening at the Dover-Calais crossing, which is by far and away our largest trade route. as well as, of course, what was happening between Britain and Northern Ireland, that I actually hadn't seen too much of what was going on elsewhere between Britain and the continent. This was referenced in a port actually not very far from me, just down the road. I pass it, when I go teaching. It's in Immingham, near Grimsby. And I do actually recall, maybe one of the reasons why I didn't pay careful attention is because I recall them being confident that they were going to be ready, that they weren't going to be as badly hit by Brexit as, say, Dover would be. But here we've got the managing director of DFDS, and he's fearing that what's going to happen now, as the volume of trade inevitably tries to pick up, because it's been suppressed so far, if the situation hasn't been improved, then those ports will not cope. He's already using the term standstill. How much more can you get? And I'll tell you something about the short clip that fascinated me, which I'll link below, of course, you can watch it yourself. So he said that his company had been preparing this for 3 years, and they thought that they were ready to go come January the 1st. Now, throughout the last couple of years, businesses were regularly surveyed on Brexit readiness. Even towards the end of last year, very few businesses, a very small percentage, believed that they were ready for what was to come. Many didn't even know how to prepare, much less that they were prepared. I mean, fair enough in some cases, like if you're an oyster farmer, how do you prepare for losing your only customer? And that's assuming they even realised that they were going to be losing their only customer, because the government wouldn't have warned them about it. As far as the government were concerned, everything was going to be fine and dandy. But the point is that DFDS presumably would have responded to those surveys as one of the small percentage who felt that they were ready. He said they basically underestimated the scale of the problem. Now, a large logistics company like this that actually put in 3 years of work into preparing for Brexit, understanding what the rules would be with leaving the customs union and single market, and they were still unexpectedly overwhelmed by the scale of the difficulties. That suggests a couple of things to me. So first of all, the bureaucracy, the systems designed by the government was much worse than anticipated, because you have to consider they wouldn't have been caught out by the rules. That's not what they'll be talking about here. We are trading with the EU now as a third country. The trading rules that British businesses are having to comply with now aren't new. It's new for those businesses, but they're not new rules. They're not Brexit rules. They didn't come with the deal. They're just standard rules. Some of them are World Trade Organization rules. Some of them are EU rules. But they're rules that have been in place for years. As such, the EU rules would actually have been implemented whilst we were members. We will have supported them. We probably came up with quite a few of them. So the rules were known, and a company who actually took the matter seriously 3 years ago would not have fallen foul of those, because those rules were out there. They wouldn't have been caught out by that. So what they would have been caught out by was the systems in place for navigating those rules. A bit like, I suppose, well, I know how to get from Edinburgh to London, but then you're given a donkey to make the journey when you thought you'd be getting a car. And the second thing that this suggests is that there'll be even more businesses struggling to cope than the government will have anticipated, because the point of the surveys was to assess business readiness, but it was based on confidence. It didn't test the business as such, it just asked them. So some businesses will have said that they were ready when they weren't necessarily ready. They were just confident that they were ready. And how many more businesses would have thought that they were ready, and then when it came to it, weren't at all? And is it that the surprise is now wrong-footing them? Because they had no guidance from the government last year on how to prepare. Are they getting any guidance now? Because I know that Michael Gove last week promised to pull out all the stops to help businesses manage, but I've not seen an announcement on how exactly this is to be achieved. I haven't seen a new policy announcement. And going back to DFDS's David Byrne, and he was asked by the correspondent, so what do you want the government to do to help with this issue? And I say his issue, really, it's the issue of everyone trying to trade goods between Britain and mainland Europe, really. And he said that one thing that was crucial was for more resources in what he called the customs clearance sector. Basically, that means we need more customs officials. In other words, we haven't recruited anywhere near the number needed. And maybe even expanded facilities. But it most definitely means more customs officials to carry out the checks and get goods moving more quickly. But like I said, if we don't have those staff in place now, can't be done overnight. He's not saying that the problem is, okay, we've got these customs officials, but they're inexperienced and it's going to take time to build that experience up. We don't actually have them, is what he's saying. You have to recruit and then you have to train. And both of those things take time. Time that we don't really have now because Brexit's here. You know, he said himself, it's not something we've done for 30 years. What we're doing now is not something we've done for 30 years. And then alluded to the issues with training staff that I talked about earlier. He put it bluntly. He said, those people don't exist. And he also added that all this actually does is to add extra cost to the supply chain for no added value. You know, his company's spent £500,000 on the additional cost so far, but it adds nothing to productivity. It's just increasing costs to do what they were able to do for less before, meaning, as he said himself, transport costs go up. And of course, if transport costs go up, then the competitiveness of businesses that need to pay those costs goes down. And that's Brexit. That is Brexit. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.